for 75 days, the Ethiopian government has waged war on the state of Tigray, and the impacts have been devastating. We know for sure that over 4 million people are currently starving and have no access to food. There's been a complete communication and services blackout, so there is no electricity, no running water, no internet, no forms of communication, no phones. We know that, unfortunately, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has partnered with the dictator in Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, and they have sent troops into the state that have literally pillaged the entire state. We know that rape is rampant in Ethiopia. We're getting these reports out little by little because, like I said, there is no form of communications. So it's a really desperate situation. Currently in Sudan, there are 63,000 refugees. There would be more, but they've lined troops up along the Tekeze River to block refugees from being able to run away from mayhem. And that mayhem is literally bombing the towns, airstrikes, ground strikes with troops. It's just really devastating. We don't really know how bad it is yet, and what we're hearing is horrendous.
You talked a little bit about a Washington Post article. Talk about that article and what has been found in that article.
So for 75 days, the people who are from Tigray have been screaming and shouting about what's happening to our families. And that has fallen largely on deaf ears. There's some people who are listening, but not enough to stop what's happening. Today, there was an article in the Washington Post that brought me to my knees. And that article basically said that from the aid agencies that were able to get through, there are very few that have, that there is a famine. The state of Tigray is on the brink of famine. They talked about emaciated children. They talked about children having to drink water out of the river, and how they're dying of diseases like cholera and diarrhea. They said people were asking just for a single biscuit. There is no food. The Eritreans are brutal. They have looted the homes, they've looted the stores, and then they stole cattle and things like that, but then they burned the farmlands. They're burning forests and burning farmlands so that the people will not recover. It is a devastating story, and you should look it up if you haven't read it yet. Finally, someone who is not connected to the people who are being impacted is speaking up. It's a huge blessing. I hope that the world takes it seriously and does something, because we are literally on the doorsteps of famine, and we have to do something right away.
There have been those who have said that this is really not happening, and they've been sharing that story with policymakers, etc., and saying that perhaps you're making this up. What do you say to those who say that this is not actually occurring?
One of the most devastating parts of what's happening is the denial of folks who I thought were my country people. And I'm just gonna put it out there because people wanna talk and dance around what's happening. But there are various tribal groups in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a very diverse country, and contrary to what people say about it having never been colonized, it was an empire that expanded and contracted and colonized indigenous Africans. So we are an incredibly diverse nation for those reasons. However, that imperial attitude still exists, and largely among the Amhara population in Ethiopia. And they are the ones who are our neighbors to the state of Tigray, and the ones who are largely carrying out these atrocities with the Eritreans from the north. So the problem, and probably one of the most devastating identity things that happened to me, was watching fellow Ethiopians, predominantly Amharas, deny what's happening and try and gaslight and tell us this isn't what's happening. They call, legislators and say, no, this is a just war. They're going in to topple the TPLF, which is a political party. And they're using that and making up stories to justify what's happening, and largely saying that people are not starving, and saying that civilians are not being targeted. Well, we already know it's not true. There's satellite imagery now that shows this. There are refugees on the ground who are telling their stories.
What is this war all about? For those that are just wanting more information and just want to basically know what this is all about, can you share the why of what's occurring?
So the big picture of what's happening, this is a war about self-determination. This is a war that has been fought over and over again in Ethiopia. And it's a story about, can Ethiopia be a nation of nations that respect one another and are able to self-administer and self-rule their indigenous populations. That's ultimately what this is about. The current Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has this imperialistic vision of what he calls one Ethiopia, which is actually a very loaded term because it has nothing to do with unity like it sounds. One Ethiopia is about bringing all these indigenous groups into one cultural identity, which means erasure. And that's what the bigger picture of what this is about. The reason that this war popped off the way that it did is the state of Tigray, the people of Tigray gave their lives to get rid of Mengistu Haile Mariam. And as part of that, they brought all these nations together to a place where they can self-rule. And so when Abiy Ahmed consolidated all of these different groups and created what he called, ironically, the Prosperity Party, the Tigrayans and TPLF, led by TPLF, an elected government elected by the state of Tigray in an actual election that happened in spite of COVID, they rebelled. I'll tell you, Weyane, which is the name of our, Weyane means revolution. And so it's just the nature of Tigrayans to want to rule and govern themselves. And so when Abiy Ahmed said, no, we're creating one party and we will no longer have this federal arrangement with different ethnicities, that was a red line. And so when he canceled the elections, because Ethiopia should have had elections. Just so you know, Abiy Ahmed was never elected prime minister. He was appointed. There was supposed to be an election in 2020 that he postponed, he said, because of COVID, which is ironic because he put the people into war in the middle of COVID. The state of Tigray held an election anyway, and they re-elected their leaders. And so now their voice is being squashed, but it's not just being squashed in a way that you would think of suppressing a vote or something. They're literally killing people for exercising democracy and for wanting self-rule.
You know, anyone involved with humanitarian aid and heart realize that starving people is not something to be accepted. Can you speak to those who would like to get more information and what could they do if they'd like to help? A lot of folks want to help. What can they do?
There are international war crimes that are happening, including weaponizing hunger. You cannot use hunger as a weapon of war, and that's what's happening, along with rape, along with a number of other things. So there are some serious crimes that are happening. The Europeans are calling it out. I'm so thankful for what's being done within the European Union, and I hope that now with the new administration here in the United States, that Joe Biden will help us get to a place where the everyday average person is not a target in a war. So what can you do to help? The number one thing that you can do right now is awareness and sharing information. Hashtag Tigray Genocide is trending all over Twitter, all over social media. So share the information. There's a big lack of information in American culture and people don't know what's happening. The second thing you can do is contact your politicians, contact leaders, contact our Congress people. Let them know that you're paying attention and that you demand an action. We want sanctions on Eritrea and Ethiopia. That's incredibly important. We need a humanitarian corridor so that the people are not suffering during this time where their farms have been looted and burned down. Those are probably the biggest things you could